7 words, one black woman, and a courtroom that went dead silent. When Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton opened fire on Twitter, calling Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett despicable, he thought it was just another political jab. No apology, no context, just 7 words that cracked open the floor beneath the Capitol. In 48 hours, those words turned into a $1 million lawsuit. In 7 days, they would collapse the career of one of Texas's most powerful men. But what no one expected, what no camera could capture, was the calm fury Jasmine carried into court. Not in her fists, but in a single manila folder. Because inside that folder wasn't just evidence, it was intent. A voice recording never meant to be heard, a quote never meant to surface, and a sentence that would burn through decades of silence, sexism, and political immunity. This isn't just a courtroom drama. It's the story of what happens when a woman who was never supposed to win refuses to lose. While this story is a fictional dramatization, it draws from real patterns of systemic injustice, racial bias, and political power abuse in America. The names are real, the consequences are imagined, but the emotion, it's painfully true. So now let's rewind to where it all began. Not with a trial, not with a headline, but with one tweet, and a silence that was about to be shattered. It hit the timeline like a sniper shot, sharp, sudden, unannounced. Jasmine Crockett is despicable. 7 words, no context, no thread, no hesitation. At precisely 9:47 a.m., the official account of Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton posted it from his verified profile, branded with the state seal like a signature of authority. It was cold, clinical, a digital bullet aimed at a sitting black congresswoman. And in less than 10 minutes, it had already begun to spread like wildfire. On conservative talk shows, the reaction was instantaneous. Radio hosts laughed, calling it brutal honesty. Pundits on cable news panels smirked, saying it was about time someone called her out. Social media influencers on the far right turned the tweet into a rallying cry, photoshopping Jasmine's face over punchlines and hashtags like radical wreckage. The comment wasn't just amplified, it was weaponized. But inside Jasmine's D.C. office, there was no noise, just stillness. Her staff stared at their screens, the words glaring back at them, monstrous in their simplicity. One of her aides broke the silence. "Congresswoman, this came from his official account." Jasmine didn't blink. She kept her eyes on the monitor, reading the sentence again, this time slower, quieter, like decoding a threat carved in stone. She knew exactly what this was. This wasn't a critique. This wasn't politics. This was a declaration, a challenge issued in public daylight from one of the most powerful legal officials in the country. And yet, the real power wasn't in the insult. It was in the reaction he expected from her. Rage, retaliation, a public meltdown he could twist and throw back in her face. But Jasmine didn't give him that. Not yet. The weight of it began to settle in her chest, not because of what he said, but because of what it represented. A man backed by the full weight of state authority had used his office to degrade a black woman in public. Not behind closed doors, not with lawyers or in court. Just 7 words and a send button, and the country watched it happen in real time. It wasn't just personal, it was structural, intentional, and deeply familiar. Jasmine had been here before, not with tweets, but with glares, with interrupted speeches, with rooms that fell silent when she entered. Not out of respect, but discomfort. She had spent her entire career learning to interpret coded dismissal, and this one wasn't even coded. Her staff asked if she wanted to post a response, a clapback, a press conference, a cease and desist. She shook her head. "No," she said, her voice like glass cutting through the noise. "Not yet." Because Jasmine knew something Ken Paxton didn't. Silence is not surrender. It's preparation. She stood from her desk, walked to the window, and stared out at the Capitol dome. "If he wants a war," she whispered, "he just started one he can't win." And just like that, the countdown had begun. Not to a tweet, not to a scandal, but to a reckoning. One folder, one lawsuit, one woman, and a system about to be dragged into the light. 3 days earlier, in the heart of Los Angeles, Jasmine Crockett had stood behind a podium, facing a sea of cameras and cautious eyes. She wasn't supposed to cause waves that morning, just deliver a calm, calculated message about immigration reform. But that's never how it worked with her. Jasmine didn't deal in polite discomfort. She spoke with the weight of a community behind her and the clarity of someone who'd stopped caring whether power liked the sound of truth. She had said it clearly, without theatrics. Texas doesn't have a border problem. It has a morality problem. And when the state's solution to human suffering is loading buses full of migrants and dumping them in front of shelters like they're trash, don't tell me that's security. That's cruelty. A few reporters blinked. One dropped his pen. And somewhere in Austin, someone hit record. Within hours, the clip had been sliced, stitched, and spun. Conservative networks ran with it on repeat, stripping away context and branding her a radical mouthpiece. One headline read, "Congresswoman attacks Texas law enforcement." Again. Another. Why is she defending illegals? But none of that compared to what Ken Paxton did next. Because Paxton didn't respond with an argument. He didn't show up with facts. He showed up with venom and state authority behind it. Jasmine Crockett is despicable, he posted. 7 words. Born not from policy debate, but from racial contempt wrapped in state power. He didn't quote her. He didn't refute her. He labeled her. And for Jasmine, that's when the line was crossed. This wasn't a debate over immigration. It wasn't even about ideology. It was about punishment, retaliation. A woman of color had stepped out of the role they assigned her. Respectable, restrained, silent, and instead, she told the truth. Loudly. And the system didn't just flinch. It struck back. In her office that night, Jasmine sat with the lights off, the city glowing faintly through the blinds. She watched the tweet again, read the headlines, replayed the news clips where commentators laughed, dismissed her, erased her point entirely. Her staff had gone home. She was alone, but not really. She carried every black woman who had ever been talked over, punished for being too direct, too emotional, too aggressive. This wasn't new. This was the same script, the same quiet, well-practiced silencing that had played out in school board meetings, courtrooms, Senate hearings. The only difference now, it was in writing, public, from an official account, and Jasmine knew exactly what that meant. She pulled out a manila folder from her desk drawer. The label on it read, Texas Office, Incident Files. Her fingers brushed over the tab, steady. Inside weren't just documents. There were affidavits, leaked memos, a name Nate Paul, underlined 3 times, and a sticky note that simply read, "He's done this before. This wouldn't be a press war." Jasmine wasn't interested in exchanging barbs on Twitter. She had something else in mind, something quieter, something lethal. She reached for her phone and dialed. "Renee," she said, "call the legal team. First thing tomorrow." Pause. "No, I'm not looking to clap back. I'm looking to make it count." Because what Ken Paxton hadn't realized, what none of them realized, was that Jasmine didn't just know how to fight back. She knew how to end careers not with scandal, but with evidence. And this time, she wasn't just speaking for her. Jasmine didn't go on television. She didn't tweet. She didn't release a statement. The world buzzed with anticipation, waiting for her to explode, to defend herself, to prove that the insult had cut deep. But instead, she vanished from the media like smoke through a crack. And that silence, it rattled them more than 1,000 press conferences ever could. In the vacuum of her response, speculation became its own wildfire. Cable news panels debated whether she had gone too far in her speech. Others questioned if she was overwhelmed, cornered, maybe even afraid. Social media exploded with armchair theories, amateur psychoanalysis, and carefully disguised vitriol. Typical overreaction from the left. She's trying to play the victim. Where's your tough talk now, Congresswoman? But inside her dimly lit townhouse, Jasmine was neither overwhelmed nor afraid. She was planning. Every second she stayed quiet, they filled the air with assumptions. They underestimated her resolve. They always had. She sat at her dining table surrounded by printouts, case files, and legal memos. In front of her was a single photo, a snapshot of a protester holding a sign outside the state capitol that read, "Power respects silence until it doesn't." Jasmine stared at it for a moment. Then she wrote 6 words on a yellow legal pad. He's done this to others before. She knew the cycle. She'd watched it happen for years. A woman, especially a black woman, speaks up. The system flinches, then strikes. The same system that tolerates corruption, excuses violence, and looks away from real injustice will never stay silent when challenged by a voice it was never built to hear. But she wasn't playing defense. She was building a case. Each article she pulled had a name. Each name had a pattern. And every pattern led back to the same man, Ken Paxton. Jasmine discovered internal emails leaked by whistleblowers, dated months apart, where women had raised concerns about retaliation and pressure from his office, only to find themselves transferred, demoted, or scrubbed from public visibility. None of it had made headlines, but now it was all about two. Her phone vibrated. A text from her lead counsel lit up the screen. "Ready when you are." She stared at it, then slowly typed back, "Almost. I want to make sure it lands." Jasmine didn't want headlines. She wanted consequences. She wasn't here to trade insults with a man who wore his power like armor and used it like a blade. She was going to dismantle the armor, nail by nail, from the inside out. She picked up the phone again. This time she dialed Renee. "I want everything on record," she said. "Every past complaint, every woman he's ever targeted. I want full names, dates, what happened, and what didn't happen after." Renee hesitated. "That's going to ruffle feathers." Jasmine didn't blink. "Good." She hung up and leaned back, letting the silence fill the room like a tide rising around her. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need to defend her dignity, because in a world that expected her to explode, her calm was the loudest scream. Let them talk. Let them guess. Let them doubt. Because in 72 hours, the man who called her despicable would walk into a courtroom thinking he'd started a political fight and realize too late he'd walked into a war. And Jasmine Crockett? She wouldn't need a microphone. She'd bring the truth and let it do the talking. The room was windowless, cold, and silent, intentionally so. Tucked beneath a boutique law firm 3 blocks from Capitol Hill, it wasn't on any public schedule. No press, no leaks, just 4 people seated at a long oak table, lit by a single overhead pendant that cast more shadow than light. In that space, nothing moved without meaning. At the head of the table sat Jasmine Crockett, her hands folded, her eyes fixed not on anyone, but on the file in front of her. She hadn't spoken yet. She didn't need to. The weight of her presence was enough to still the room. Her legal counsel, 2 top-tier civil rights litigators and 1 ex-DOJ investigator, waited like chess players about to enter the middle game. And everyone knew this wasn't just about defamation anymore. Renee broke the silence first. "We've reviewed the tweet. No qualifiers, no protections, no ambiguity. He didn't just express an opinion. He made a personal attack, and he did it from his government account. That's state-sponsored defamation." Her tone was crisp, but her eyes were searching Jasmine's face, reading every twitch and flicker. There were none. The ex-DOJ investigator leaned forward. "But here's the thing. If you're going after him, Jasmine, you can't just make it about you. They'll spin that in a second. You need to show he's done this before, that this is a pattern. Otherwise, he plays the martyr, you become the angry radical, and the media runs the script we've all seen before." Jasmine didn't flinch. "I already have names," she said. "I want them vetted. I want statements. We don't walk into that courtroom with a complaint. We walk in with a record." There was a brief pause. Then the senior litigator spoke, slowly, as if testing the air with every word. "You understand, if we go forward, this becomes more than just a lawsuit. This will drag every dirty detail out of his office and into the light. They'll come for you harder than ever. Personal history, family, past clients, everything. They'll try to smear you 6 ways to Sunday." Jasmine looked up, her voice like steel wrapped in velvet. "They've already tried to erase me with 7 words. I won't let them write the rest of the story. The room held its breath. And then, quietly, the ex-DOJ agent slid a manila folder across the table. We've already started digging. There's a woman named Carla Jimenez, former deputy chief of staff. Filed a complaint 2 years ago. Internal only. Went nowhere. But we have her statement, and there are others. Jasmine opened the folder and scanned the first page. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't look away. This isn't just about holding him accountable, she said. It's about showing every woman watching that silence doesn't have to be the end of the story. A long beat passed. Then Renee nodded. Okay, we build the case. And just like that, the room shifted. The stillness wasn't hesitation anymore. It was alignment. The first move had been made. Jasmine stood, gathering the folder in one hand. Her voice was low, steady, and absolute. If they want to make this personal, I'll make it structural. And if they want to bury me in silence, then we dig. The farther they dug, the darker it became. Carla Jimenez wasn't an anomaly. She was the blueprint. Hired young, fast-tracked, and then discarded when she questioned too much. Her complaint, buried in the personnel system like a body no one wanted to find, detailed months of gaslighting, verbal attacks, and a sudden reassignment after she challenged the legality of an internal policy order. Jasmine read every word of her sworn affidavit under the blue cast of her office lamp. And when she reached the final paragraph, he didn't want silence. He wanted obedience. Her hand clenched the paper so tightly it left creases like scars. There were others. A Latina policy advisor who resigned abruptly after accusing the Attorney General's office of retaliatory demotion. A black paralegal whose HR file was suddenly misplaced after she reported hostile behavior. Even a white male veteran with 20 years of service who spoke up in a deposition about a pattern of discretionary punishment used to silence dissent. Their stories weren't identical, but their endings were. Muted careers, closed doors, reputations fractured in silence. This wasn't a string of coincidences. This was architecture. Inside Jasmine's team's makeshift war room, a reconfigured conference space now papered in timelines, printed email chains, and highlighted testimonies. Every inch of corkboard told the same story. Ken Paxton didn't just react, he targeted. And his favorite targets? Women. Women of color. Women who asked questions. Women who didn't laugh when the room expected it. Women who interrupted instead of waiting their turn. Jasmine stood before the board, arms crossed, eyes burning through layers of history. He used the state like a club, she said, and we're going to snap it in half. Renee clicked open a new file on the projector screen. It was a scanned document labeled Confidential, Office of Attorney General, Conduct Code Violation Draft. It had been anonymously sent to Jasmine's office just 12 hours earlier. No cover letter, no sender ID, just the file, raw and damning. In it were outlined the internal discussions around shielding senior staff from formal misconduct reviews, provided their public optics were still favorable. Translation? As long as the media didn't catch it, it wasn't real. Jasmine, Renee said slowly, this is bigger than a defamation case? Jasmine didn't look away from the screen. That's the point. I'm not just suing him for what he called me. I'm suing the system that made him think he could. The ex-DOJ agent leaned forward, brows low. You realize once this gets out, the legal counterattack will be brutal. They'll drown this thing in motions, tie you up in discovery, make it about your tone, your history, your fitness. Jasmine turned, eyes sharp. Let them pull every email I've ever written, every photo, every mistake, because for once we'll make them play by their own rules. The room went still again, but it wasn't silence out of fear. It was focus, razor sharp. Outside, the sun was setting behind a haze of clouds, but inside that room it felt like something was rising, slow, unstoppable, and fueled not by vengeance, but by precision. Jasmine looked around at her team, her voice calm but crackling with voltage. This isn't about me anymore. It's about every woman who ever walked into a government building thinking merit was enough. We're not filing a complaint. We're filing an earthquake. And as the projector light dimmed, the wall of evidence loomed behind her like a battlefield blueprint. This wasn't a story of a tweet gone wrong. This was a system wired to punish resistance, and a woman who finally had the fuse. The clock read 11:42 p.m. when Jasmine finally stood from the edge of the war room table, her palms pressing against the wood like a general bracing for the first cannon fire. Her team was drained, coffee cold, shoulders slumped, eyes red, but no one moved. No one spoke. They were waiting for one thing, her word. She had spent hours staring at the evidence, names, timelines, internal memos, recordings whispered into burner phones. This wasn't a trail, it was a burial ground, and every document they uncovered was a tombstone carved with silence. But Jasmine Crockett hadn't spent her life becoming a congresswoman to whisper back. She walked to the head of the room, heels clicking with unnerving precision. "We're going to file the suit." No hesitation, no qualifiers, just the decision, final and sharp. Her lead counsel blinked. "Defamation only? Or are we going for broader grounds?" Jasmine didn't miss a beat. "Defamation, yes, but I want the complaint to include abuse of office, patterned retaliation, targeted discrimination. Let the court see what happens when unchecked power becomes a weapon." The room stirred. Renee typed furiously. The ex-DOJ investigator leaned back in his chair, exhaling like a man who'd just been handed the match for a powder keg. But Jasmine wasn't done. "I want every woman he silenced listed," she said. "By name if they give us consent. By code if they're scared. But I want the judge to see that I'm not standing in that courtroom alone. I want them to feel the weight of every career that man shattered." There was a gravity to her now, the kind that doesn't yell or plead, but pulls everything around it into orbit. Even the light seemed to dim, as if the universe understood what was about to unfold. "Jasmine," Renee said cautiously, "this puts you directly in the crosshairs. The backlash will come fast and personal. They won't just come for your record. They'll come for your reputation. They'll make you out to be emotional, unstable, vindictive." Jasmine smiled, tight, cold, unshaken. "They already did that the minute he hit send." She reached for the final draft of the complaint, its title bold at the top, Crockett v. Paxton, Civil Action for Defamation and Misconduct. Her fingers lingered over the page. Then, like a blade through velvet, she signed her name. "This isn't about a tweet," she said quietly. "It's about making them admit that we see them, that their silence won't protect them anymore. That calling me despicable wasn't just rude, it was calculated. It was power reminding me where I'm not supposed to stand." The room went still again, but not from fear. It was awe. "Then let's remind them," her counsel said, sliding the folder into the secure case. "You're not standing alone." Jasmine nodded once. Her voice dropped into a whisper, but every syllable struck like thunder. "I'm not here to survive this," she said. "I'm here to end it." As they packed up and turned off the lights, the hum of the city outside carried on unaware. But inside that room, a line had been crossed. A choice had been made. And the first shot of a reckoning had just been fired. Not with noise, not with rage, but with truth, written in ink and sealed with resolve. The room was small, sterile, and smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old fear. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like nervous witnesses. 4 women sat in a circle of folding chairs, not one of them looking directly at the others. Their names weren't listed in any press release. They didn't sit in front of microphones. But each of them carried something Jasmine Crockett needed. Truth, bruised and buried under years of silence. Jasmine entered without fanfare. No security, no aides. Just her in a worn leather notebook she clutched like a shield. She didn't speak right away. She sat down in the only empty chair and let the silence settle, like dust shaken from the rafters. Because she knew sometimes the most painful truths only surface when no one's rushing to hear them. Carla Jimenez spoke first. Her voice was low, brittle. "He didn't yell. That's what made it worse. He just made sure you knew you'd stepped out of line. And then things stopped happening. Promotions, assignments. Suddenly, I was the only one not getting calls back." She swallowed hard. "I didn't even know I was being erased, not until it was done." Next was Lila Monroe, who once ran a policy advisory team under Paxton's leadership. "I had 20 years in state law. I asked one question about a contract linked to one of his donors. She shook her head. 3 weeks later, I was accused of being mentally unfit to lead. They sent me a letter and locked me out of my office. Another woman, eyes red-rimmed but defiant, added, they use professionalism like a weapon. You don't cry, you don't get angry, you don't dare raise your voice, or suddenly you're emotional, unpredictable, not team-oriented. But if you stay quiet, they make you disappear anyway. Jasmine listened. Every word was a blade, cutting open the facade that Paxton's office had polished for public view. These weren't isolated incidents. They were coordinated silences, manufactured doubt, and career assassinations performed without fingerprints. Then came the voice that cut the deepest. Tony Graves, once a rising star in the civil litigation division, now working at a nonprofit legal clinic far outside the spotlight. She didn't speak at first, just looked at Jasmine, eyes hollow with the weight of someone who had seen too much and said too little for too long. I saw the tweet, Tony finally said. When he called you despicable, I knew what he was doing. Not just to you, to all of us. He wanted to make an example out of someone louder, bolder, more visible. Someone they couldn't quietly demote or fire. He wanted to remind us where we stand. Jasmine leaned forward, her voice steady. And where is that? Tony met her gaze with something just short of a smile. Where they're not ready for us to be. For the first time that day, the room shifted. The tension didn't lift, but it reformed, hardened. These women hadn't gathered to vent. They had come to remember, and Jasmine had come to make sure their remembering would not be in vain. I'm not asking you to relive what they did to you, Jasmine said. I'm asking you to help make sure they don't get to do it to anyone else. A pause. Then one by one they nodded. Jasmine stood, notebook still clutched in her hand. She didn't need to write down what she'd heard. She wouldn't forget. These weren't witnesses anymore. They were the foundation. The cracks in Paxton's empire had just become fractures, and Jasmine was done knocking politely on the door. The walls of Jasmine's temporary legal war room were no longer blank. They were bleeding with evidence. Documents pinned edge to edge, photographs taped in clusters, strings of red thread tracing patterns across names, dates, policy shifts, and personnel changes. It didn't look like a case file anymore. It looked like a crime scene. But this wasn't a mystery. Jasmine knew exactly who did it. At the center of the storm was a folder marked NP, Nate Paul, a real estate mogul turned political liability. Jasmine hadn't planned to drag him into this. But the deeper they went, the more undeniable it became. Wherever Paxton left wreckage, Nate Paul's name wasn't far behind. A whistleblower had handed over partial transcripts from a 2020 internal investigation, quietly suppressed, never published. The content was damning. In one meeting, Paxton's staff expressed concern about optics regarding the Attorney General's unusual legal interventions on Paul's behalf. The tone wasn't legal, it was loyal, transactional, dangerous. This is the thread, Jasmine said, her voice taut with clarity. He didn't just attack people. He protected the ones funding him. We're not just talking about defamation. We're talking about corruption. Her team nodded, exhausted but electric. Every puzzle piece fit too neatly. The tweet wasn't an outburst. It was a diversion. A warning shot fired across Jasmine's bow the moment her voice got too close to something Paxton needed buried. And now it was all about to be unearthed. Renee entered holding a flash drive like it was radioactive. You're going to want to see this, she said. Jasmine plugged it into the secure laptop. The screen flickered once, then opened a single video file. The footage was grainy, but the audio was sharp. A private meeting. Paxton's voice unmistakable. She's too loud. If she keeps poking around, we make sure she's discredited. Same way we handled Lila. Silence. Then another voice. What about legal exposure? A laugh. Legal exposure's only a problem if someone actually files. Jasmine froze. The words hung in the room like a noose. It wasn't just strategy, it was contempt. Arrogant, calculated. He hadn't just underestimated her. He'd dared her to fight. And that, Jasmine thought, was his biggest mistake. She stood slowly, breathing through clenched teeth. This video goes in the complaint. Full transcript. I want the public to hear exactly how he talks about justice. Renee nodded. Do we have corroboration? We will, Jasmine said. By tomorrow. The ex-DOJ investigator walked to the board, pinning a still from the video next to the whistleblower's transcript. This is no longer a defamation case, he muttered. This is a time bomb. Jasmine walked to the head of the table. Her voice was calm, but every word hit like steel. Then let's light the fuse. From that moment on, the pace doubled. Interviews were transcribed, timelines were locked, legal language refined into weapons. Every affidavit was sharpened. Every allegation was backed by proof. They weren't just building a case, they were constructing a reckoning. By nightfall, the formal complaint was nearly complete. 67 pages long, layered with hard evidence, sworn testimony, and a narrative that would rip through the courthouse like a grenade. Jasmine reviewed the final page, redlining a single word. She replaced alleged with documented. Then she handed it back. No more ambiguity, she said. Not this time. Because this time, silence wasn't the weapon. Truth was. It came in a battered manila envelope. No return address. No name. Just the words, internal use only, stamped in faded red across the front. It had been slid under the side door of the building at dawn, before the city had even stirred. The envelope was slightly torn at the corner, as if the sender had changed their mind, then committed anyway. Renee found it first. Her fingers trembled slightly as she peeled back the flap, pulling out a stack of photocopied documents. Old personnel memos, handwritten notes in the margins, email printouts with entire lines blacked out in marker. She read the first page, then the second, and her breath caught. Jasmine, she whispered, you need to see this. Jasmine didn't respond immediately. She was reviewing the final legal summary when Renee dropped the file on the table. A single sheet on top had been circled in thick ink. Jasmine leaned in, eyes narrowing. At the top, in bold, subject, conduct flag, non-escalated incident, 2019. Below it, a summary of a meeting between Ken Paxton and a legal intern, female, black, 23. She had filed a quiet complaint about inappropriate remarks made in passing by the Attorney General. The internal review was never opened. It was marked, handled verbally. 3 days later, she was reassigned to filing duty in a basement office with no windows. A month after that, she left the department. No statement, no exit interview, just a line in a forgotten HR system. Jasmine's jaw tightened. Her eyes flicked through the rest of the pages. Another flag name, this one a policy coordinator who challenged a discretionary fund. Gone. Then a paralegal who questioned the removal of anti-harassment language in a staff handbook. Gone. Dozens of names buried under years of silence, red tape, and erasure. This wasn't just a pattern, it was policy. And then, at the very back, was the note that stopped her cold. A printed internal email dated June 12th, 2020. It was short, brutal. If Crockett ever runs for higher office, we'll make sure she doesn't forget who she's dealing with. KP. The initials were unmistakable. Renee stepped back, stunned. He's been watching you for years. Jasmine didn't blink. And now he knows I've been watching him back. She pulled a pen from her jacket pocket and scrawled across the top of the document. Exhibit A, retaliation pattern. The ex-DOJ agent entered mid-sentence, holding a sealed envelope. Deposition transcripts just came in, he said. 2 witnesses willing to testify on the record. Both say they were pressured to sign non-disclosure agreements in exchange for severance. Do they tie it back to Paxton? Jasmine asked, her voice like a knife drawn across glass. Directly. Jasmine didn't sit down. She stared at the wall where all the names now formed a spiderweb of red lines and linked betrayal. Then she turned, slowly, her voice low but thunderous. They built this file to bury it, to protect him, and now we're going to use it to bury the system that let it happen. She lifted the envelope, pressed it flat on the table, and looked at her team. Add it to the filing, top of the stack. I want the judge to read this before he even learns my name. No one spoke. There was nothing left to say. The last brick in the wall had just been pulled loose, and the structure they thought would stand forever was starting to tremble. It was 9 a.m. sharp when the double doors of the Capitol press room groaned open, and for a split second, time seemed to freeze. The reporters had been murmuring, checking their phones, sipping bitter coffee. But when Jasmine Crockett appeared, silence fell like a blade. No entourage, no teleprompter. Just her, standing in the doorway, flanked by the weight of truth and a thin manila folder held tightly in her left hand. She didn't rush. Her footsteps were deliberate, echoing with quiet resolve across the tile floor. Cameras pivoted toward her like predators smelling blood. But what they saw wasn't prey. It was control. Cold, composed, and terrifying in its calm. At the podium, she didn't clear her throat. She didn't smile. She looked into the sea of lenses and pens and power, and then she opened the folder. "I've read the tweet," she began, her voice smooth, precise, carrying like thunder behind glass. "And I know what it meant. But more importantly, I know why it was written." A ripple moved through the room. Fingers tapped record buttons. Live feeds activated. This wasn't the response they were expecting. No fiery speech, no trembling outrage. Jasmine was surgical. "What you're about to receive," she said, raising the folder slightly, "is not a press release. It's a legal complaint, a federal civil suit, filed against Attorney General Ken Paxton for defamation, abuse of office, and coordinated misconduct." She let the words hang for a beat, then delivered the strike. "This isn't political theater. It's evidence. Names, dates, memos, emails. Real people. Real careers destroyed. Real women silenced." Gasps flickered like sparks. One reporter dropped his pen. Another looked at his producer, mouthing, "Did she just say coordinated misconduct?" But Jasmine wasn't done. "This isn't just about me," she said, locking eyes with the cameras now. "It's about every woman who was ever punished for being smart, direct, or unwilling to smile on command. It's about the interns sent to closets, the advisors demoted after speaking up, the emails scrubbed from government servers because they were inconvenient to power." She opened the folder. "And in case anyone doubts that this was a pattern, not an accident, let me be clear. We have the proof. In this filing are confidential documents leaked from within Paxton's own office, memos that show deliberate efforts to retaliate against women who challenged him, especially women of color, testimonies from former staffers, a recording where he openly brags about discrediting dissent." The room was now dead quiet. No coughs, no shifting chairs, just the slow, heavy sound of consequences settling in. "I didn't ask for this fight," Jasmine said, "but I'm not walking away from it. Not when someone in public office believes they can use their title as a shield while they weaponize their power against people like me." Her tone sharpened like a blade drawn across a whetstone. "I'm not filing this lawsuit to clear my name. I'm filing it to make sure no woman has to carry hers like a target again." And with that, she placed the folder on the podium, tapped it once, and stepped back. No applause. No grand exit. Just the soft sound of shutters clicking as Jasmine Crockett turned and walked out the same way she came in. Alone, but never silent again. The complaint had been delivered. The cameras had caught every frame. But what no one expected, what no network could have scripted, was the moment that followed. Because just as Jasmine reached the door, she stopped, turned, and spoke one final line. Not to the press, not to Paxton, but to the nation. "This lawsuit is not about reputation," she said, her voice cold and cutting like a scalpel. "It's about power, and who gets to use it without consequence." The room stopped breathing. A single sentence. 17 words. And yet it struck with the force of a gavel-cracking marble. In the back corner, a seasoned political reporter whispered, "That's the headline." A producer in the control booth muttered, "Did she just frame the whole damn system?" Phones lit up in every news agency, texts firing like nerve endings through the body of a country that had grown too used to silence from women like her, and too comfortable assuming they'd stay silent forever. Jasmine didn't linger. She didn't explain. That sentence wasn't an argument, it was a verdict, delivered in real time. And it spread like a detonation. Within minutes, the clip was on every social feed. The hashtag number sign, without consequence, surged past 1 million mentions in under an hour. News anchors stumbled to reframe their coverage mid-broadcast. Commentators, once poised to paint Jasmine as overreacting, began tripping over themselves to pivot. Whether you agree or disagree, it's a serious accusation, one muttered on air. She came with receipts, another admitted. This isn't grandstanding. This is surgical. But inside the Capitol, the silence still held. Even Jasmine's legal team, watching from a secure room upstairs, sat in stunned stillness. Renee blinked, exhaled, and finally broke the tension. She just turned a lawsuit into a revolution. Jasmine, now in the corridor, didn't say a word. Her face was unreadable. Not triumph, not rage, just resolve, sharp and unwavering. Because she knew what that sentence had done. It had reframed the entire battlefield. This was no longer about a tweet. It was about a man in power believing he could defame a congresswoman without blinking, because the system had taught him he could. It was about the women whose careers had been crushed, whose reputations had been mangled behind closed doors, whose names had been written in pencil, easy to erase, never in ink. It was about the black intern who was reassigned for reporting harassment, about the Latina advisor told she was too opinionated for policy work, about the white whistleblower forced into early retirement because he backed the wrong truth at the wrong time. And it was about the fact that Ken Paxton had survived them all, until now. Because Jasmine Crockett wasn't just coming for him. She was coming for the system that had allowed him to thrive. And the moment she said those words, who gets to use it without consequence? She made everyone in power stop and ask themselves one question. What if I'm next? That fear, that shift. That's when you know the ground has started to move. Back in the press room, a junior reporter whispered into her phone, I think this is bigger than we thought. I think we're watching history reset itself. And down the hall, behind a heavy wooden door, Ken Paxton sat motionless. The folder was in his hand. His knuckles were white. Because even before the subpoenas landed, before the hearings began, before the judge called court into session, he understood something bone deep and inescapable. She didn't just file a lawsuit, she lit a fuse. The morning after Jasmine's press conference, the political landscape didn't just shift, it convulsed. By 6:15 a.m., the full 67-page legal complaint had leaked. Reporters devoured it line by line like it was a classified dossier dropped in the middle of a scandal. The language was precise, devastating. Each page read like an autopsy of power gone unchecked. Redacted emails, verified witness statements, and a voice recording so incriminating it played on cable news like a courtroom siren. This is not just a defamation case, CNN's legal analyst announced, holding up the pages on live television. This is systemic misconduct. She's naming names, showing patterns. This is a political indictment in the form of a civil suit. By 8 a.m., the internet had declared open war. Power, without consequence, exploded across every platform. Women began sharing their stories, first quietly, then in waves. Former staffers from the Attorney General's office spoke out, some anonymously, some with trembling courage and full names. One wrote, I lost my job because I questioned a policy. Jasmine's lawsuit proves I was never crazy, just inconvenient. Paxton's team scrambled. By noon, his spokesperson issued a cold, dismissive statement. Congresswoman Crockett is engaging in performative politics. The Attorney General will not be distracted by partisan theatrics. But the media didn't bite. This time, no one was buying the narrative of the angry black woman overreacting. Jasmine had facts, documents, patterns, and she had delivered them with surgical precision. Then came the donors. In a rare political fracture, several high-dollar contributors to Paxton's past campaigns issued quiet but unmistakable statements of concern. Disturbing allegations, one wrote. We'll be reviewing our continued support, another posted. The money didn't dry up all at once. It cracked, and cracks become fault lines. Inside the Capitol, the whispers began. Staffers in 3 different offices confirmed that Republican lawmakers, many of whom had stood shoulder to shoulder with Paxton for years, were privately reevaluating their loyalty. This could be the scandal that sticks, one aide said, because it's not about policy, it's about character, and it's coming from someone with credibility. Behind closed doors, Jasmine's legal team was inundated with calls. Journalists wanted interviews. Advocacy groups offered support. But Jasmine turned most of them down. She didn't want noise. She wanted pressure, focused and deliberate. Still, there was one call she took. It came from a former assistant AG, a man. Quiet voice, careful words. I stayed silent, he admitted, for too long, but I saw what happened. I saw how he talked about women like you when the doors were shut. If you want a statement, I'll give it. Just tell me when. Jasmine closed her eyes, the phone pressed to her ear, heart pounding. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was becoming something bigger. The curtain wasn't just being pulled back, it was being ripped down. By nightfall, Paxton's office was locked in emergency meetings. His PR team shifted from deflection to damage control. But it was too late. The fire had jumped the containment line. And in the center of it all, Jasmine stood silent. Not smug, not loud, just present. Because she knew the storm had just begun. And for once, it wasn't coming for her. It was coming for him. The courtroom was packed before the judge even entered. Rows of reporters filled the benches, their pens poised like daggers, waiting for a slip, a smirk, a sentence that would light headlines on fire. C-SPAN cameras were mounted in the corners, blinking like quiet sentinels. The energy wasn't anticipation. It was a fuse waiting for ignition. Jasmine Crockett sat at the plaintiff's table, posture straight, hands folded neatly in front of her. No nerves, no theatrics, just presence. Her legal team flanked her, flipping silently through binders, highlighting key passages, marking time like soldiers before a breach. Across the aisle, Ken Paxton reclined with the confidence of a man used to winning on default. His navy blue suit was perfectly tailored, his silver cufflinks gleaming beneath the lights. He didn't look angry. He looked amused, as if the entire proceeding was beneath him, a temporary inconvenience in his decades-long march through Texas politics. Then the bailiff called the room to order, and everything changed. "All rise," he barked. "The Honorable Judge Elaine Monroe presiding." Judge Monroe entered with slow, deliberate steps. No robe flare, no drama, just gravity. She took her seat, eyes scanning both tables. Neutral, calm, dangerous. "This court is now in session." The silence was electric. "Counsel for the plaintiff," the judge said. "You may begin." Jasmine's lead counsel, a seasoned civil rights litigator named Martin Ames, rose. His voice was calm, but his words struck like hammers. "Your Honor, members of the court, today you will hear not just about a tweet, but about a pattern, a structure, a system of power used not to serve the public, but to silence it." He took a single step forward. "Our client, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, was called despicable by the Attorney General of Texas. Not in private, not in passing, but in an official statement broadcast to millions with intent to harm and discredit her. That is defamation, and we will prove it." A quiet shift in the room. But this case is not just about words. It's about what follows those words. When the state's highest legal authority uses his platform to punish critics, erase careers, and intimidate women who dare to challenge him. We will show you emails, transcripts, audio recordings, and testimony from those who were erased. He paused, then locked eyes with the jury. Power without consequence is not justice. It's tyranny in a tailored suit. Then he sat down. A beat. Then the judge turned to the defense. "Mr. Kessler," she said. Paxton's attorney stood, smoothing his jacket like an actor prepping for curtain. His smile was slick, his voice polished. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are here today because someone didn't like being criticized. That's it. This case is an overreach, a political stunt dressed in legal robes. Attorney General Paxton expressed an opinion, harsh maybe, but protected under the First Amendment. What my esteemed colleague calls a pattern, we call accountability. And we believe once the facts are presented, you'll agree this case has no merit." He sat down like he'd already won. But Jasmine didn't flinch, because she wasn't there to win the moment. She was there to expose the machinery behind it, and the trial had only just begun. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly, not by design, but because a storm outside rolled across the sky like a warning drum. Thunder murmured low in the distance as the bailiff wheeled in a monitor, wires trailing like veins. The screen, black for now, stood between two worlds, truth and the destruction of its denial. Jasmine sat motionless, her hands resting lightly on the table. Her eyes weren't on the screen. They were on Paxton, watching, measuring, waiting. Martin Ames, her lead counsel, approached the center of the room with a flash drive pinched between his fingers like it was made of glass. He spoke not to the jury, but to the judge. Your Honor, the plaintiff moves to introduce video evidence marked Exhibit C, time-stamped, verified, and authenticated by two independent digital forensics experts. Judge Monroe nodded. Proceed. Martin inserted the drive. The screen flickered, then it began. Grainy footage, a dark-paneled room, the camera angle slightly off-kilter, like it had been placed in haste. The voices, however, were crystal clear. Paxton's voice filled the room, smug, sharp, careless. She's loud. If she keeps poking around, we'll make sure she's discredited. A pause, then another voice, nervous. What about legal exposure? A laugh. Legal exposure is only a problem if someone actually files. The jury shifted. Several members leaned forward. Then came the dagger. It's always the same, Paxton said. The ones who look like her, they make it personal, emotional. Just wait. She'll overplay it. They always do. The words were soaked in venom, arrogance, and a racial subtext so loud it didn't need decoding. In the back of the courtroom, a woman gasped softly. A pen slipped from a reporter's hand and clattered to the floor. But no one moved to pick it up. All eyes stayed locked on the screen. Then, as if summoned from hell itself, came the final blow. Paxton leaning forward in the video, voice low. She doesn't belong here, and I'll make sure the voters remember that. Silence. Real, suffocating silence. When the video ended, the screen went black. But the weight of the words remained, thick in the air like smoke after an explosion. No one spoke, not even Judge Monroe. It was the kind of silence that doesn't invite conversation. It demands reckoning. Martin turned to the jury. This, he said, voice low, almost reverent, is not opinion. This is not protected speech. This is calculated character assassination. This is power weaponized to erase, to silence, to destroy. He pointed at Jasmine, who had still not moved. And she didn't respond with rage. She responded with evidence. The judge cleared her throat. Her voice cracked through the silence like thunder catching up to lightning. Defense? Kessler, Paxton's attorney, stood slowly, pale, sweating. We dispute the context of this video. We will address authentication in cross-examination. He sat down quickly, the words limp and useless. But it didn't matter. The damage was done. Paxton sat like a man who had just realized his shadow was no longer behind him, but standing in front of him, bearing his name. The jury didn't need a legal degree to understand what they'd just heard. They had seen a man in power laughing at consequence, and a woman who turned that laughter into evidence. It wasn't the documents. It wasn't the testimonies. It wasn't even the damning video that cracked the foundation beneath Ken Paxton. It was a single sentence, spoken in court, from a witness who had once sat just a few doors down from his office, forgotten, overlooked, erased like so many before her. Her name was Toni Graves. She took the stand with steady hands and a storm behind her eyes. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't have to be. Every syllable landed like a strike against glass, already spidered with fractures. I was told, word for word, she said, that if I kept questioning policy decisions, I'd be transferred somewhere I couldn't do any damage. And when I asked what that meant, they said, "You'll be the next Lila Monroe." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Lila Monroe, another woman silenced and forced out under mysterious internal review. Until now, it had always been speculation. Quiet accusations, whispers behind closed doors. Now it was official, spoken under oath. The judge leaned forward. Can you confirm who said that to you? Toni didn't flinch. Ken Paxton, in his office, with the door closed. No witnesses but me and my memory, and I remember every damn word. It wasn't fire or fury that followed. It was collapse. The gallery sat frozen. The jurors' pens hovered mid-sentence. Paxton stared straight ahead, face expressionless, but his right hand gripped the arm of his chair so tightly his knuckles turned white. For the first time, it felt like something was shifting, not just legally, but in the unspoken order of things. Because up until now, Paxton had been untouchable. He mocked, he maneuvered, he buried problems in paperwork. But in that moment, with one woman refusing to forget, his aura cracked. Jasmine didn't look at him. She didn't need to. Her gaze was locked on Tony. A nod passed between them. Not for the court, not for the jury, but for every woman who'd ever walked out of a government office, wondering if they were crazy or if the system was simply designed to make them feel that way. The judge called a recess. Gavel down, but no one moved, because they all felt it. The breaking point wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, precise, unstoppable. Truth spoken in a courtroom for the first time, without fear. It took the jury 8 hours. 8 hours of deliberation behind sealed doors. 8 hours where the world outside spun with headlines, speculation, and a breathless kind of anticipation. Inside the courtroom, time seemed suspended. Jasmine sat still, unmoved, her fingers clasped loosely on the table, like a statue carved from pressure. Paxton, for once, didn't recline in confidence. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, his face rigid, jaw locked like a man holding back the weight of inevitable collapse. Then the doors opened. 12 jurors re-entered, faces unreadable. The kind of stillness that comes not from fear, but from knowing they were about to alter history with a single sentence. The bailiff took the envelope. The judge nodded. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Monroe asked. The foreman, a woman in her 60s with silver-streaked hair and eyes that had seen too much, stood slowly. "We have, Your Honor." She passed the paper forward. The judge unfolded it, read it once, then again. Her face gave nothing away. In the matter of Crockett versus Paxton, on the charge of defamation of character, a beat sharp and heavy, we find in favor of the plaintiff. A sound escaped the gallery. Not a cheer, not applause, just a sharp, collective intake of breath. Like a courtroom exhaling truth it had held too long. But Monroe wasn't done. On the charges of abuse of office, retaliation, and willful misconduct. She paused again. Time seemed to stop. We find in favor of the plaintiff. Paxton didn't move, didn't blink. He stared forward, eyes hollow, like a man watching his reflection shatter from the inside. The judge's voice cut through the hush. The court awards compensatory damages to Congresswoman Crockett in the amount of $1 million. And then, just as Monroe prepared to adjourn, she added a sentence that would echo far beyond the courtroom. The conduct presented in this case reflects a disturbing misuse of public office. This court encourages further review by appropriate legal and ethical boards. Translation: this wasn't over. Jasmine still hadn't moved. It wasn't shock. It was something deeper. Her victory wasn't a surprise. It was validation. A truth she'd carried in silence while the world questioned her tone, her motives, her right to even demand justice. And now the system had spoken. Not for her, but finally because of her. She stood, not triumphantly but steadily. As reporters burst out the door and phones lit up across the country, Jasmine didn't smile. She turned toward the gallery, toward the women who had testified, the allies who stood by her, the ones who thought they'd never be believed. And she nodded. This wasn't about the $1 million. It was about the message. Power isn't invincible. Silence isn't forever. And justice, when pursued relentlessly, doesn't whisper, it roars. By dawn the next day, the headlines weren't just reporting the verdict, they were counting the casualties. Paxton found guilty was the front page. But beneath it, the real story unraveled like a stitched-up wound finally torn open. His allies scrambled. His donors vanished. The State House corridors that once echoed with his name now buzzed with urgent meetings behind closed doors. And in every corner of Texas politics, the question wasn't if Paxton would fall, it was how fast. It began with the funders. 2 major donors publicly withdrew support by 10 a.m., citing deep concern over the verified misconduct and a betrayal of public trust. Then came the resignation threats from senior staff, those who had quietly endured his leadership but refused to stand beside him now that his shadow had turned toxic. In private chambers, Republican lawmakers, many of whom had once championed him, began crafting distance. A leaked memo revealed internal pressure to call for his resignation, citing the optics disaster and legal vulnerability to impeachment proceedings. One senator, who had defended him for a decade, was overheard saying, "He's radioactive now. If we don't cut him loose, we all burn." Paxton, once the loudest voice in any room, went silent. Reporters camped outside his home. Cameras lined his office hallway. But there were no statements, no denials. Just blinds drawn tight and aides delivering boxes to waiting vehicles. One staffer whispered to a reporter, "He thought the law was armor. Turns out it was paper." Meanwhile, Jasmine remained quiet, but visible. She didn't gloat. She didn't grandstand. Instead, she walked into the Capitol the next morning with the same steady rhythm she always had. Except now, every door opened. People stood when she entered. Even her critics lowered their eyes, unsure whether to offer respect or brace for impact. Because Jasmine hadn't just won, she had ended an era. The institutions that once protected Paxton now began dismantling his image piece by piece. Editorial boards that once praised his toughness now published scathing op-eds titled "The Culture of Fear is Over." Civil rights groups called for federal investigations into his office's past conduct, and former employees began lining up to share what they'd been forced to bury, truths sealed behind NDAs and threats of career destruction. By the end of the week, the Texas State Bar launched a formal ethics inquiry. The governor's office, silent through most of the trial, released a vague statement about respecting the judicial process. But everyone knew what that meant. The fortress had cracked, and no one wanted to be caught standing in the rubble. Jasmine watched it unfold from her office, a single light illuminating the stack of letters now pouring in. Thank yous from strangers, testimonies from women she'd never met, invitations to speak, to lead, to run for higher office. But she didn't respond right away. She just watched, because she understood something the cameras didn't capture. She hadn't just defeated a man. She had dismantled the illusion that power couldn't be held accountable. And once that illusion breaks, it doesn't rebuild. It crumbles. Quietly. Completely. Permanently. The stage was small, just a podium beneath a simple white canopy on the Capitol steps. No banners, no flashing lights, no choreographed anthem to open the moment. But as Jasmine Crockett stepped forward, the nation leaned in, not because they were told to watch, but because they couldn't look away. The wind carried her coat slightly as she stood beneath the morning sun, the courthouse still visible behind her, like a monument to what had been survived and what had finally been undone. Microphones buzzed. Reporters fell silent. Phones lifted into the air, already live streaming what would soon become the most replayed political speech of the year. Jasmine didn't waste a single second. "When a man in power called me despicable," she began, voice clear and resonant, "he wasn't talking to just me. He was talking to every woman who dared to speak without permission. Every voice that didn't flinch, didn't bow, didn't break, even when the weight of silence tried to crush them." A ripple moved through the crowd. "I brought this case not because I needed the world to defend my name, but because the world needed to remember something we've been too afraid to say out loud. Power without consequence is not leadership. It's tyranny wearing a smile." Applause erupted, but she raised her hand and the crowd fell quiet again. "I stood in that courtroom for women who were fired for being too assertive, for interns reassigned to windowless offices because they asked the wrong question, for mothers who were told to lower their voices and daughters who were told to know their place. I stood there because I refused to be erased." She paused. Then she delivered the line that would be etched into history books. "We don't need more lawmakers. We need people who live the law." The silence afterward was thunderous. And then the roar came. Not orchestrated, not polite, but raw, pure. Thousands standing, clapping, crying. Not because a woman had won a lawsuit, but because a system had finally lost its grip on silence. Jasmine stepped down from the podium, calm and unshaken. She hadn't just spoken truth to power, she had made the truth louder than power itself. The courthouse emptied, the cameras turned off, the crowd dispersed, but Jasmine Crockett remained in motion. alone, walking down a quiet Capitol hallway, lined with portraits of men who had never expected to see someone like her take the stand, let alone shift the axis beneath them. Her steps were slow, deliberate, echoing against marble floors that had, for decades, carried power cloaked in entitlement. But now something different lingered in those halls. Not applause, not triumph, a tremor. In a side room, staffers whispered over policy drafts. In the rotunda, interns replayed her speech on their phones, lips mouthing each word with reverence. Outside, a group of law students, mostly women, mostly black and brown, stood at the courthouse gate holding handmade signs. She spoke. We rose. This wasn't noise. It was ignition. The despicable foundation, an idea she had once scribbled in a notebook during a sleepless night, was already receiving thousands of inquiries, not just from women in politics, but teachers, nurses, administrative assistants, women in tech, mothers fighting family court battles, survivors of retaliation buried under layers of bureaucracy. They didn't just want to thank Jasmine. They wanted to fight with her. Inside her office, the lights were low. Jasmine stood at the window, watching a city pretend everything was normal. But it wasn't. Not anymore. Because while men like Paxton had ruled with silence, she had shattered it. And what rushed in wasn't chaos. It was clarity. A former staffer she'd never met emailed her that night. The message was short. When I was silenced, I thought it was just me. You made me realize it was all of us. And now, we're not alone. Jasmine didn't reply right away. She simply pressed her hand against the glass, the Capitol lights glowing in the distance. She had won the verdict, but something far more dangerous had begun. She hadn't just filed a case. She had cracked a system, and what poured out wasn't just truth. It was fury, solidarity, memory, and the kind of courage that doesn't fade when the cameras stop rolling. Movements don't start with crowds. They start with one woman who refuses to break. And as Jasmine Crockett stood in the quiet of that evening, she knew one thing with unshakable certainty. They hadn't just heard her, they were ready to follow. That night, as the city dimmed and headlines blazed across the nation, a single voice broke through the noise. Not from a podium, not through a verdict, but from the soft, steady tone of Jasmine Crockett speaking to a packed auditorium of students, lawyers, mothers, and workers who had felt the long reach of injustice in their own quiet corners. She stood not as a victor, not as a politician, but as a woman who had dared to confront the machinery designed to grind voices like hers into silence. And now, face to face with the people who would carry this fire forward, she didn't offer celebration. She offered truth.